Everybody hi, and let's jump right into this second video about the rules of Nevsky, a game by Volko Renki, first of his new series, Levy and Campaign, about warfare during the Middle Ages at an operational scale. In the first video we already played a full game turn and learned all the basics of this game. Now we will keep on playing through the second turn and dig deeper into the rules until you know them all and are ready to play a game of Nevsky by yourself. So, here we are, beginning of the second turn, last turn of summer, year 1240. Teuton lords already took the fort of Izborsk, but Russian armies are running to relieve and save the city of Pskov. This turn, the last one before a long winter, will be decisive. So, we begin with a new levy phase, and every levy phase starts with both players drawing 2 event cards. Each player has his own deck of cards called Art of War cards. Each card is made of 2 parts. The upper part is an event, the lower part is a capability. For now, at the beginning of the levy phase, players draw event cards, so they look only at the upper half of their cards. First, Teuton player draws a no event card. This card does nothing, it is just discarded. Teuton's second event is Mindaugas, a pagan Lithuanian chief who decides to commit some raids into Russian territories. Teuton player just follows card's instructions. He can ravage immediately one location without any stronghold within 2 locations of Ostrov. There are 4 possible locations for this raid. He cannot raid Dubrovno because they are the Russian lord as specified by the card. Teuton player chooses Zelcha River. He places a ravage marker and earns immediately half a VP but no provender because there's no actual Teuton lord doing a ravage action. Teuton player discards the event, and that's all for him. Both Russian event cards state hold. That means that Russian player keeps these cards face down until he decides to use them. He can keep them as long as he wishes, over several turns if needed. For example, the first card he drew cannot be used this turn because it's summer, but Russian player keeps it in hand until next turn. Both players can discard held event cards at the end of each turn. In the third video, we will browse all the cards and see how to use them in your strategy. We will see also very soon what the lower part is about, but for the moment, just keep in mind that each player draws and carries out 2 events per turn. Now let's go on with the levy phase, and it's time to talk about money, because in these dark times, back in the Middle Ages, local lords didn't commit their private army for nothing. And the levy phase is the moment where everybody counts their savings and wonder if war is worth fighting. Up to now, we saw the levy phase at the moment when lords muster other lords or new vassal troops or new transport capacities. But before that, players must check if their lords have still the will to fight. In other words, you'll have to pay your lords if you don't want to see them disband and leave the field. On the calendar, we can see all the lords not yet on the battlefield. And we can see also when they become available. On Teuton's side, black counters, Andreas and Heinrich are already available since last turn, and so they are still available now. On the Russian side, white counters, the Karelian tribes will be available next turn, but not yet. And Russian player will have to wait another 3 turns before the famous and powerful brothers Andrei and Alexander become available. On that same calendar, we also see service markers, the rectangular counters, for all lords already on the battlefield. And these markers show until when these lords intend to fight. When the turn marker reaches his service marker, a lord just disbands his troops and go back home, totally disappearing from the battlefield. Here, there's one service marker in this turn's box, Yaroslav, That means that if nothing is done, Yaroslav disbands now. He leaves the battlefield. But turn player would like to keep Yaroslav. For that, the rule is simple. For 1 coin, a lord stays at war 1 more turn. Player can pay several coins at once to buy as many turns. These coins must come from that lord or another lord in the same location, even if they are besieged. A lord can also be paid in kind with loot, but only in a friendly location and not besieged, because a besieged stronghold, even home, is not a friendly location anymore. And so, what happens if a player does not pay because he can't or because he doesn't want to? An unpaid lord at the end of his service is removed from the map and all his troops and belongings are discarded. This lord will become available again after a number of turns equal to his service value. Yaroslav's service value being 2, it would become available in 2 turns from now. Note that losing Yaroslav, Teuton player also loses his lordship point that he won't spend during the following muster step. And note that if Yaroslav is mustered again later in the game, he will come back on the battlefield in his initial state with his initial forces and all vassal troops available. And so, letting a lord go and waiting the duration of his service rating is a way to refresh his mat and get again his initial forces. Okay, but Teuton player can pay and he doesn't want to lose Yaroslav now. Especially, Yaroslav can pay with his own coin he got from his box siege. So, he pays and that moves Yaroslav's service marker 1 box to the right on the calendar. Fine, Yaroslav doesn't disband this turn and he will fight on the battlefield 1 more turn. Hermann also has a coin. He can keep it, but he can also spend it now to buy another turn for himself or any lord in his location, Yaroslav or Rudolf. He cannot use this coin to pay Knud and Abel because they are not in his location. Teuton player spends this coin for Rudolf. And now you see how both players will need continuously to find coins to maintain the cohesion of their armies. So, let's take a step back and summarize how players gather coins. For now, the only way we know to earn coins is to conquer strongholds. You remember, this is the last column of the stronghold table. The spoils of wars you earn the moment you win your storm battle. Okay, but we just saw in the last video how difficult it was to storm a stronghold, and there aren't that many enemy strongholds on the map. So, you need another way to earn coins, and that is the tax action. Taxing is one of the 9 available actions during command phase. A lord in his siege stronghold uses all actions from his command card and gain 1 coin. Let's see, Hermann for example. For him, earning 1 coin with taxes means marching back to Odempe or Dorpat. Hermann is powerful enough to have 2 siege strongholds, so he can choose. Then stay there for 1 full command card. This is the tax action, earning 1 coin. Then march again into battle in Russia. 3 command cards for 1 coin. That's not worth it. The only way to do that efficiently is to stay home long enough to earn a lot of coins and to buy a lot of service time before going to war. You can also earn coins and carry them with you, but beware, if you lose a battle, your opponent will take your money as spoils of war. This is the third way to earn coins. Hopefully, lords can also be paid with loot. Loot is earned like coins by spoils of war when storming a stronghold. But loot can also be earned by ravaging enemy location with buildings on it. Ravaging is far easier to do than storming a stronghold. But lord can only be paid with loot in a friendly location. So, coins are still the best way to pay your lords if you are the attacker thrusting your army far into enemy territory. Okay, let's summarize. From the beginning of this second turn, both players drew 2 event cards each. Then they pay with coins or loot to keep their lords on the battlefield. that is to slide their service markers to the right on the calendar. And now we are back to what we already know, it's time for mustering. Teuton player first, then Russian player spend their lordship rating to muster new lords, new vassal troops or new transport capacity. But let's talk now about a fourth option. Lords can also muster capabilities. Let's start with Hermann. He musters with a lordship value of 3. Let's say that he spends 1 point to muster 1 cart because he needs transport capacity on roads. Then, with his 2 remaining points, he decides to muster capabilities. As you remember, each player has a deck of 18 Art of War cards. Capabilities are the bottom halves of these cards. And thus, a lord can spend 1 point from his lordship to buy one of these capabilities. The player can freely browse his deck of cards and choose a capability. Here, for example, Hermann, with 2 lordship points left, can buy 2 capabilities. He chooses Trebuchet because he knows that he will attack the city of Pskov, and this capability will help him reduce the city's wall advantage. He also buys Ordensburgen. With this capability, all Teuton lords can use commanderies as extra seats for supply. Commanderies are cities bearing this special coat of arms. The first card, Trebuchet, shows the text "This Lord." That means that only Hermann benefits from this capability he just bought with his own lordship rating. He puts the card under his personal mat. As you see, there is room for 2 cards only. A lord cannot own more than 2 capabilities with the words "This Lord." The Ordensburgen capability doesn't show the words "This Lord", so it applies to all Teuton lords. It is placed under the game map. At any game time, a player can own a number of such joint use capabilities equal to the number of lords currently at war on his side. In the third and last video of this series, we will browse all the cards for both players, but for the moment, let's carry on with our levy step. With the lordship of 3, Knud and Abel muster 3 ships because they aim to raid the northernmost strongholds by the North Sea. Rudolf von Kassel spends his only 1 lordship point to muster vassal troops, and finally Yaroslav muster 1 cart. And that's it for the Teuton player. And note, it's very important that all these muster actions are possible because Teuton lords are in friendly locations. Knut and Abel on the Teuton side of the border and the 3 other lords in a freshly captured stronghold. Had the fort of Izborsk not been captured, none of these 3 lords would have been able to muster. Okay, now Russian player's levy phase. The Russian player always plays second after the Teuton player. With the lordship of 3, Gavrilo starts by mustering 1 boat, then with the 2 points remaining, he buys 2 capabilities. Remember, he takes all the Art of War cards and chooses freely the ones he wishes. Capabilities are on the lower half of each card. Here, 2 cards are missing because, as you remember, Russian players drew 2 event cards at the beginning of the levy phase. 2 cards he kept for future use during the turn. And because events and capabilities are the 2 halves of the same cards, each drawn event is 1 less capability to choose from. And the opposite is also true. Remember that when you buy a capability, you take its upper half event out of the game as long as you keep this capability. And so, with 2 points, Gavrilo musters Lushniki that gives archery attack to his brown units, militia and light cavalry, and Stone Kremlin that gives a wall bonus that will be very helpful when defending the city of Pskov. And note that on the left side of each capability, some symbols show to which lords that capability applies. Stone Kremlin can be used by any lord, but Lushniki only by these 4 lords. Luckily, Gavrilo's coat of arms show that he can use it. Okay, now Gavrilo keeps these 2 capabilities, and because they show the words "this lord", Gavrilo keeps them under his mat. Every lord can so keep a maximum of 2 capabilities, that's okay for Gavrilo. And keep also in mind that when a lord musters some capabilities, he will keep them even after the end of the turn. So, mustering capabilities is a way to upgrade your lords and your armies in the long run. After Gavrilo, Domash and Vladislav muster new vassal troops. Vladislav also musters a capability for all the Russian side, Archbishopric of Novgorod. With this capability, Novgorod becomes a seat for all Russian lords. Vladislav feels that with the Teuton attack so close to Republic capital city, it is wise to allow taxes, supply and lord mustering directly in Novgorod. And our levy phase is over. After the levy phase, it's time to go on with the campaign phase. As you remember, first both players choose 6 command cards that set which lords will act and in which order. 6 cards because it's summer. Players choose 4 cards in winters and 5 in Rasputitsa. Then, card after card, one by one, each lord performs a number of actions equal to his command rating, each action being chosen from a list of 9 possible actions. Okay, plan step, and once again player must choose which of their lords will do actions this turn. For the Russian player, for example, it's a real problem. He has 3 lords and no choice but playing them one by one without being able to unite them in one big army. In fact, there is a solution to merge 2 lords' forces. Let's suppose here that in the previous turn Vladislav did move to Dubrovno with Lord Domash. So now, at the beginning of this campaign, Domash and Vladislav share the same location. Now, during the plan step, Russian player can decide to stack both lords to unite their forces. Only 2 lords can be stacked, never more. In such a stack, the top lord is called the lieutenant. And from now, for the duration of this campaign, both lords' full force will be under the command of this lieutenant, here Vladislav. When selecting command cards, Russian player uses only Vladislav cards for the whole force. Domash cards are useless. Domash cannot do any action on his own. If by mistake Russian player put a Domash command card in his selection, this card will be considered as a pass card. Note that Russian player chooses Vladislav as his lieutenant over Domash because Vladislav's command value is better 3 versus 2. Every lord can act as a lieutenant as long as both lords are stacked during plan step. After that, it's too late. Both lords must start the campaign stacked and stay stacked during the turn. There is another solution, far more powerful and convenient: marshals. Each player, at most, has 1 marshal. A marshal is a lord with a ring printed on his cylinder, like Hermann here for the Teuton player. There is only 1 marshal per player. Alexander is the Russian marshal. Andreas von Felben is the Teuton marshal. But if these lords are not on the battlefield, a subordinate lord can replace them. Andrei for Russian player, Hermann for Teuton player. In our example, Andreas von Felben not being here, Hermann is the actual Teuton marshal, and without Alexander nor Andrei, there is no marshal on Russian side. A marshal is like a super lieutenant. Every time he draws his own command card, he can take with him other lords from his location. He doesn't have to stack with them beforehand, he can just choose to take them when leaving the location. He can take as many lords as he wishes. If later these lords' own command cards are drawn, they still can move independently. Lieutenants and marshals' rules are for moving lords together, but lords without moving can also share actions or assets only because they share the same location. First, as we already saw, in case of battle, all lords in battle location must fight, as attacker or as defender, whether their command card is active or not. They also share their assets. That means, for example, that all their assets are added together to feed their troops. Assets are never moved from a lord's mat to another lord's mat, but lords can share them and consume them as a whole. Here, for example, Hermann, Rudolf and Yaroslav share the same location. Let's suppose they got a move thought marker, they must feed their troops. Every lord having less than 7 units in his army must spend 1 provender. Rudolf can use his own provender, so does Yaroslav, but Hermann has no provender, so Yaroslav can share his remaining provender with Hermann and all troops are correctly fed. Beware, a lord must always feed his own troops first. In this situation, for example, Yaroslav could not feed Hermann's and Rudolf's troops instead of his own. He must first feed his own troops, then share his last provender with Hermann or Rudolf. When performing a supply action, lords can also pool their transport capacity to reach a lord's seat and gather provender. If marching together, thanks to marshal or lieutenant grouping ability, they share their assets to compute whether or not they are laden for provender transport. Here, for example, Yaroslav, if alone, should pay 2 command points for 1 march because he doesn't have enough transportation capacity to carry his provender. But because all assets are shared during the group march, under Marshal Hermann, the 3 lords together can carry their shared provender for only 1 command point. Okay, let's go back to our actual game situation. Russian player cannot stack his lords and declare any lieutenant because they don't share the same location. And Teuton player doesn't have to because Hermann is a marshal and can freely form a group. So, no lieutenant this turn. Now both players choose their 6 command cards for the campaign. Russian player mixes Gavrilo and Domash to react and adapt to whatever can happen, and keeps Vladislav for the end of the turn, fearing an attack in the north from Knud and Abel and keeping Vladislav ready to go back to defend his homeland. Teuton's strategy is quite straightforward. Give to Hermann as much power as possible, as fast as possible, and let him lead the other 2 lords as their marshal. Then switch to Knud and Abel for a strong raid along the North Sea coast. All these choices are secret. And then we carry on with the command phase. First command card, Hermann. As a marshal, he wants to lead his full army to Pskov, but he has only 1 provender for 3 lords. That's a problem. He doesn't want to spend too much time gathering provender in Izborsk because he fears that Domash and perhaps Vladislav will reach the stronghold before him. So, Teuton player wants at all costs that Hermann's full army ends his first command card in Pskov. Is it possible? Let's do the math. Hermann has 3 command points. He could start by spending his first 2 points, gathering provender and keeping his last point to march to Pskov. Hermann, for example, could forage. In summer, he can forage anywhere. With 2 forage actions, he could gather 2 provenders. Okay, but he can do better with the supply action. This action provides also 1 provender, but 1 per seat that this lord can link with, up to a maximum of 2. Hermann has 2 seats with his coat of arms, Odempe and Dorpat. Even better, because Hermann mustered the Ordensburgen capability at the levy phase, he can also supply from any commanderies, so Atzel, Venden, Felin. He chooses Odempe and Atzel, which are the 2 closest supply centers. Both are 2 trackways away, so he needs 2 carts for this supply. Trackways uses carts in summer. Note that Hermann doesn't need 4 carts. A same transporter set can be used for multiple routes, and because all stack lords can share their transport capacity, Hermann can use the 2 carts he needs even if he owns only 1 cart by himself. With 1 supply action, Hermann earns 2 provenders. It's not enough for the long siege that awaits him, so with the second supply action, he earns 2 more. Okay, Hermann spent 2 actions for supply. He has 1 action left to march to Pskov. The 3 lords as a group can share all their assets. They own 4 cards to carry 5 provenders. That's one too many. If Hermann wanted to march with all 5 provenders, it would cost 2 command points. He has only 1 command point left, so he discards 1 provender and moves with 4 cards and 4 provenders. Hermann, as a marshal, leads Rudolf's and Yaroslav's armies in addition to his own forces. As soon as they all arrive in Pskov, they meet Russian Lord Gavrilo, and it's time for us to summarize what can happen when a lord enters an enemy lord's location. First, the enemy lord, here Gavrilo, can stand and fight. In this case, there would be an immediate battle as we saw in the previous video. Second, Gavrilo can flee to avoid combat. And this is always possible. A lord is never compelled to fight. If he chooses to flee, the lord moves to an adjacent location. He cannot go to the location the attacking lord is coming from. He cannot go either to a location with enemy troops or enemy stronghold. Here, Gavrilo could go to Zelcha River, Dubrovno or Ostrov. When a lord flees to avoid combat, he can take all assets he can carry without being laden. So he can take provender up to his transport capacity and cannot take any loot. What he leaves behind is seized by the attacker as spoils of war. As you know, Gavrilo has a third choice because there's a friendly stronghold in his location. He can withdraw in the stronghold behind the walls. The maximum number of lords that can thus withdraw in a stronghold is equal to the siege capacity. Pskov siege capacity is 3, so 3 lords can withdraw in it. A withdrawing lord keeps all his belongings regardless of his transport capacity. Here, that's what Gavrilo does. In all 3 cases, Hermann and his army being in Pskov location, a siege begins. Don't forget that as soon as a battle or siege happens, the current command card is over. Now, because he moved, Hermann gets a move fought marker, but also Rudolf and Yaroslav, who moved with him. Note that Gavrilo, the Russian lord, doesn't get that same marker for withdrawing into the stronghold. Had he retreated in an adjacent location to avoid battle, he would have got a moved fought marker. This command card is over, the 3 lords must feed their troops. Even if they moved as one big army under Hermann's command, they must feed their troops individually. Each lord has less than 7 units, so they each pay 1 provender, and because they share the same location, they can share their assets. But beware, don't forget that a lord must always feed his own troops before helping others. So, Hermann and Rudolf first feed their troops, then Hermann can help Yaroslav by spending 1 of his own provenders for him. Next card, Russian player Gavrilo. So, what can Gavrilo do? Trapped as he is, besieged behind the wall of Pskov, let's zoom a little. Gavrilo cannot move. He cannot leave the city, he cannot forage nor supply, even if the city is his own seat. In fact, being besieged, he can do nothing but pass or sally. The sally action is when a besieged lord rushes out of the stronghold to fight the besieging forces in the open. It is the only way for him to break the siege. But doing so, he loses the advantage of his stronghold walls. The sally action causes a standard combat where the besieged lord is the attacker. Teutons are the defenders. With 3 lords, Teuton player chooses how he puts them in center, left and right wings. The defender will take advantage of his siege works that will act as walls during the fight. But Gavrilo won't take any advantage of the city walls nor any garrison, because he chose to leave the city. That's the sally action. The sally battle is fought exactly like a standard battle and not like a storm battle. If Gavrilo, the attacker, wins the battle, Hermann, Rudolf and Yaroslav will have to retreat and leave the location. The siege would be over and Gavrilo would become free again to move and do whatever he wishes. If Gavrilo loses the battle, he must withdraw inside the city of Pskov, besieged again. But even if he loses, he always destroys one siege work down to a minimum of 1. Okay, here Gavrilo thinks that his chances of success are weak and he prefers to stay behind the walls. And remember, at Levy phase, Gavrilo bought the Stone Kremlin capability. So, perhaps is it the perfect time to use it. This takes all his command points and he gains a +1 walls marker to show that Pskov walls are now 1 point stronger. Note that Gavrilo can use this capability even if besieged. Note also that he keeps his capability card and can still use it later, but on another stronghold. Each stronghold can only get 1 +1 walls marker. Next card, Teuton player, Hermann. Hermann could storm the fortress, that is, attack Gavrilo behind his walls. But remember last video, Hermann already did that and failed. Okay, now he came back with Rudolf and Yaroslav, but in a storm battle, if you remember, only one lord can fight at a time. And because of the newly strengthened Russian walls, Hermann prefers to spend his command to improve his own siege works and prepare for a later assault. This is the siege action. First, a siege action uses all action points from a command card. Hermann will do nothing else. The goal of the siege action is to add a new siege works counter that will help besiegers' forces during the storm. There's a prerequisite for the siege action. Besieger must have a number of besieging lords at least equal to the stronghold siege capacity. Here in Pskov, there are 3 Teuton lords for a siege capacity of 3. That's okay. Hermann adds a new siege works marker and his command card is over. Beware, the siege action gives a move thought marker to all lords, besieging and besieged. And this is very important because remember, Gavrilo is trapped inside the city and cannot perform any action but sally. He cannot supply nor forage, so if the besieging army can supply and hold its siege long enough, the besieged army will slowly starve. Here, not only the besieged force has a supply problem, but also the besiegers. Only one Teuton lord can feed his troops, and it is Hermann. And because even in a group, a lord must always feed his own troops before helping others, there's no choice. Hermann must use his provender for himself. So, Hermann feeds his troops, but Rudolf, Yaroslav and Gavrilo cannot. No more grain in their wagons. And what happens when a lord with a moved thought marker cannot feed his troops? Easy but devastating. All the lords who cannot feed their troops see their service markers shifted 1 box to the left on the calendar. They lose no troop, but they lose their will to fight. Rudolf's, Yaroslav's and Gavrilo's service marker are shifted 1 box to the left. Current turn is turn 2, and Yaroslav's marker entered this turn's box. Remember what we saw previously for the Levy phase. If a service marker enters the current turn's box on the calendar, that lord disbands. He leaves the battlefields and goes home with all his troops and assets. It's over for Yaroslav. Yaroslav's cylinder is removed from the map and put on the calendar a number of turns in the future, to the right, equal to his service value. With a service value of 2, Teuton player will be able to muster Yaroslav again in 2 turns. One could argue that Teuton player could have avoided that by better managing his provender's logistics, but he was in a hurry to attack Pskov before the arrival of Russian reinforcements, even if that meant giving up one of his own lords. Let's see if he were right. Next card, Russian player Lord Domash. And Lord Domash feels that the moment has come to relieve Gavrilo and the poor city of Pskov. Because neither he nor Vladislav is a marshal, they won't be able to stack and attack together. This is only possible during Levy phase by appointing a lieutenant. So, he must attack alone, and that's exactly what he's going to do. With 2 command points, he starts with a forage action, earning 1 provender. Then, with his second command point, he marches to Pskov. Okay, now, in Pskov, Domash meets the Teuton armies and, as usual, they can flee or stay and accept the fight. Hermann stays, of course. Note that he cannot withdraw into the stronghold because it is not a friendly stronghold, he is currently besieging it. There are three major forces in Pskov. Gavrilo inside the city, besieged, Hermann and Rudolf outside the city, besieging it, and Domash, the relief army, coming from the outside to release Teuton pressure. So first, there is a standard battle between Domash, being the attacker, and the defending Teuton lords. This is the main battle. Domash is attacking Marshal Hermann and his army. Teuton player must put one lord in the center box and chooses where he puts the other, left or right. And then, Gavrilo, for no additional command, can go out of the city to help Domash. And because Teuton army turned around to face Domash assault, Gavrilo attacks behind their back. If the attacker had a lord in reserve, Gavrilo should attack this reserve. But here there is no Teuton reserve, so Gavrilo attacks Rudolf. He must attack toward the center, but Rudolf won't be able to strike him back. There are two simultaneous battles here, one standard and one sally. In the standard attack, Rudolf, as the defender, must fight back at Domash, who is attacking him, while sallying Gavrilo will hit Rudolf's back without being hit in return. Hermann is a flanking force, hitting Domash as part of the standard battle. Because Gavrilo is fighting a sally battle, his hits must pass through Teuton siege works. And because it's not a storm battle, the walls of Pskov give no benefits to Gavrilo. Okay, let's resolve this battle. Here are the forces. Hermann bought a capability during Levy, the trebuchet, to lower enemies' walls, but it is useless here because Hermann is not attacking the city. He is defending against a relieving force. Gavrilo will use his Lushniki capability that gives archery to all his brown units, light cavalry and militia. We know how to resolve a battle, let's do that quickly. First, nobody concedes. Both players think they have a chance to win this decisive battle. So go. Defender has no archery, so we skip the first step. Then Russian archery. Gavrilo, with his Lushniki capability, fires all his brown units against Rudolf. Half a hit per archer unit, that gives 1.5 rounded up is 2 hits for Rudolf. But as Gavrilo is sallying from the city, Rudolf benefits from his siege works. There are 2 siege works markers. They shield the Teuton lords like a strength 2 wall. Rudolf rolls 2 dice, 1 for each hit. 1 and 4, 1 hit reaches Rudolf. Rudolf tries to absorb it with an armored knight. 6, he fails. Now Teuton's cavalry. Both Teuton lords strike the attacker, that is Lord Domash. No one can strike Gavrilo in their back as long as the main attack is not over. So, Teuton lords add up their cavalry against Domash for a total of 9 hits. A huge blow that Domash must now try to absorb. He would like to preserve his cavalry, so he tries first to absorb with men-at-arms. After 4 die rolls, Domash has lost both his men-at-arms. Then he tries to absorb the rest with militia. Okay, a total of 6 of his units are now routed. Domash is in bad shape, but he survives. Next, attacker strikes back with his cavalry. Domash against Rudolf. Then, Gavrilo from its back through the siege works. Domash's total cavalry strength is 2.5, rounded up to 3. Rudolf tries to absorb with 2 cavalry units and he loses both. That's a bad loss. Then Gavrilo strikes with a cavalry strength of 2, but his hits must before pass through Teuton siege works. They are both blocked, no hits for Rudolf. Next, Teuton's foot units. Hermann against Domash. Rudolf doesn't strike because he has no foot units anymore. Domash must absorb 2 hits. He tries with his knights unit. It absorbs all hits. Domash stands against the assault. And finally, Russians strike with their foot units. When several lords strike, you must add their forces before rounding up. So here the total Russian strength is 4, of which 3.5 from Gavrilo must pass through the protection of siege works. Rounded up, that means that all 4 hits must pass through the siege works. The equivalent wall strength is 2, and all 4 hits pass through. Then Rudolf tries to absorb and misses his very first roll, routing his last unit. Without any good order unit left, Rudolf himself becomes routed and is pulled out of the battle. Okay, but Rudolf absorbed only 1 hit. There are 3 left for the only remaining Teuton lord, Hermann. Hermann still benefits from the protection of the siege works, but we already made the protection rolls and we know that the remaining 3 hits passed through. Hermann tries to absorb with his knights unit. He loses 1 on his last roll. And this is the end of the first combat round. No side is totally routed and no player did concede at the beginning of the first round, so we immediately proceed to the next round, round 2. And first question, does a player concede now? First, the attacker Russian player must decide. His problem is that if he loses this battle, Gavrilo, as a besieged lord doing a sally attempt, will have to withdraw in the city, while Domash will have to retreat to the location he is coming from, Dubrovno. Russian player doesn't want to see his forces split again, and he thinks that he can still repulse Teuton invasion and break the siege. Rudolf's route gives hope that it is still possible. Russian player doesn't concede. Teuton player, on the other side, needs spoils of war to pay his lords and keep them in his crusades a few more turns. And he estimates that he has still the best army. Okay, nobody concedes. Let's go on. First, Teuton army must reposition. The rule is simple, the center box cannot stay empty. Hermann must slide and fill the center box. Now let's resolve this second round. No defenders archery, so attackers archery with Gavrilos Lushniki, half a hit per brown unit, that is 1.5 rounded up to 2, that must pass through the siege works. 1 passes, Hermann absorbs with his remaining knight, protection roll, okay, nothing happens. Next, Hermann strikes Domash with a combined cavalry strength of 3. Domash tries to absorb. His knight's protection roll fails right away. He must absorb the rest with his unarmored brown units and he loses them all. With no unrouted units, Lord Domash himself routs. Okay, but battle is not over. Perhaps there's still a chance for Gavrilo. He strikes Hermann with his knight's unit through the siege works protection. He inflicts 2 hits, both pass through the siege works, but Hermann absorbs and loses nothing. Then, defending Teuton player strikes with his foot units. Domash being routed, he can at last strike Gavrilo. And because Gavrilo is actually sallying and not defending, he doesn't benefit from Pskov city walls. Teuton lords inflicts 2 hits, Gavrilo loses 2 units. He can still strike back with a strength of 3. 2 are blocked by the siege works and 1 is absorbed by the knight unit. Third round. This time Russian player decides to concede. From now on, all hits he will inflict will be halved, but as we'll see very soon, it's always better to concede when you are clearly losing a battle. Third round, Russian archery. Gavrilo strikes with a strength of 1. Don't forget his strength is halved because he conceded. The hit passes through the siege works, but Hermann absorbs it with his knight's unit. Okay, I go faster through the end of the fight. And finally, all remaining Russian forces rout. The Battle of Pskov is now over. Let's look at its aftermath. First, both sides must check their losses. Every routed unit must do a protection roll. The number needed to pass depends on armor, that is, the color of the unit. If it succeeds, the unit goes back to normal, to the upper half of its mat, but if it fails, it is eliminated. Protection rolls are as usual, but beware, if one side lost without conceding, all his lords being routed, that side must do protection rolls for all units on a 1, just as if all units were unarmored. And that's why Gavrilo conceded at the beginning of round 3. Even if it was too late to actually flee from battle, this conceding allows now all Russian units to roll for protection with usual armor values. Okay, so both players roll. And as you see with these results, not conceding would have been a huge disaster for Russian player. Never forget to concede when you think you will lose a battle. Units that failed their roll are eliminated, others are recovered back on their lord's mat. Then the losing side must retreat. Domash was attacking from Dubrovno, so he must retreat to Dubrovno. No choice. An attacking force must always retreat to where it comes from. And Gavrilo, because he was besieged at the beginning of the battle, has no choice but to withdraw into the stronghold again. Now, the question is, what assets can they take with them in their retreat? Russian side conceded, so Domash can bring with him all providers he can carry. And because he retreated along a trackway with 2 carts, he can keep his 2 provenders. Gavrilo withdraws into the stronghold, so he keeps all his belongings. Of course, on Teuton's side, Rudolf does not retreat nor does he lose any asset. All his units were routed during the battle, but he is not on the losing side, only the losers have to retreat and lose assets. Because Russian lords kept all their belongings, there are no spoils of war for Teuton lords. Also, there is no sacking of the city because Teuton player was not storming the city. He was just the besieger defending against a relieving assault from the Russian player. And wait, there is more. At the end of every regular battle or storm battle, the losing player must check how this military defeat affects his lord's will to fight. For every retreating lord, the player rolls 1 die. On a 1 or 2, this lord service marker is shifted 1 box to the left on the calendar. On a roll of 3 or 4, it is shifted 2 boxes left, and on a 5 or 6, 3 boxes left. Here, Russian player must roll only for Domash because Gavrilo didn't retreat. He withdrew into the stronghold. He rolls a 2. Domash service marker is shifted 1 box to the left. Now, every lord that moved or fought gets his moved fought marker, and the command card being over, they must all feed their troops. And only Domash is able to feed his troops. Gavrilo, Hermann and Rudolf cannot. So their service marker lose 1 box each on the calendar. And now Gavrilo's and Rudolf's service marker are in the same box as current turn marker. That means that both lords must disband. Now, whenever a service marker reaches the current turn, its lord disbands. Note that if they had coins or loot, Gavrilo and Rudolf could have paid immediately to shift 1 box right as during the levy phase and stay at war, but they have not. So, Gavrilo and Rudolf disband. Their cylinders are removed from the map and are put on the calendar, a number of boxes in the future to the right equal to their service value. That is in 4 turns for Gavrilo and 2 for Rudolf. Their belongings are discarded, so are their troops, their capability cards, their mats, their service marker also. Players must now wait 4 and 2 turns until they can muster Gavrilo and Rudolf again. So finally, even if that Russian relief battle was a defeat, it caused the loss of 1 strong Teuton lord, Rudolf. And you have to understand that because it's a very common strategy in Nevsky. Remember that you can always attack an enemy stronger than you, not to defeat him on the field, but to force him to feed his troops and disband if he has not enough provender. Okay, go on, next card, Teuton player, Hermann, for the third and last time. And Hermann is now in a very bad position. He is alone under the walls of Pskov, with no provender to feed his troops. Perhaps he could march back to Izborsk and do some forage action to gather some provenders, but no, because next turn at Levy phase, his service marker will be in the current turn's box and he will disband. So, above all, he needs money, he needs coin. And the only way to get some coins is to storm the city of Pskov, to win that storm battle and to sack the stronghold. But wait, Hermann is alone and such an attack seems crazy. The city of Pskov being empty, can he just conquer it with the siege action? Yes, he could try that. When a stronghold is empty, the besieger can just try to ask his citizens to surrender. The siege action uses all his command points, then he rolls a die, and the city surrenders if the result is equal or lower than the number of siege markers. But here there's a problem again. If the city surrenders, it is conquered, the Teuton player gains a victory point, but there is no sacking, no spoils of war. If the stronghold surrenders peacefully, you cannot burn its houses and steal its grain. Here, with 2 siege markers, Pskov would surrender on a die roll of 1 or 2, but that would be useless for Hermann, who needs provender and coins. So, Hermann has no other choice but to storm the city of Pskov. And we already did that in the last video, so I won't replay the whole storm battle in every details, just the highlights. A storm action looks like a battle with some differences. First, it is an action that costs 1 command point when the battle is just a consequence of a march action. Also, a storm uses only the center box on the battle board. And, cavalry being dismounted, it makes no difference if your army is made of foot or horse units. There is no defending lord inside the city, but there is still a garrison, as shown on the stronghold table. Pskov is a city, its name is encased in a double box, so it gets a garrison of 3 crossbowmen. Defender has a wall protection of 3 plus 1 because Gavrilo used his Stone Kremlin capability. Teuton attackers get protection from their siege works. And also remember, Hermann bought the Trebuchet capability at the beginning of his turn, so he reduces Russian walls by 1, cancelling the effects of Russian Stone Kremlin's capability. And because Besieger has 2 siege works, he has 2 battle rounds to take the city, that is, destroy all garrison. So, defender's archery, nothing. Attacker has no archery, defender foot units, 2 routed Teuton units. And then, finally, attacker foot units, 1 garrison lost. Second round, defender's archery, blocked by the siege works. No attacker's archery, defender's foot units, nothing. And at last, attacker's foot units and 1 garrison unit stays alive. Hermann had 2 rounds of battle to win that storm. These 2 rounds are over. Hermann failed. So, he doesn't get any spoils of war, and at the end of his command card, he cannot feed his troops. He loses 1 space on the calendar, and because he cannot pay a coin either to stay at war, Hermann disbands, and this is not good news for the Teuton player. With this example, you see now how important it is to prepare your military campaign by gathering enough coins, enough provenders, and a strong transport capacity before attacking tough targets like the city of Pskov. Next card, Russian player, Lord Gavrilo. Gavrilo is out of the battlefield, so Russian player must pass. Next card, Teuton player, Knud and Abel. Let's see now what will happen along the north coast. As the Teuton player, we know that we put 3 command cards for Knud and Abel in the deck, so our goal is now to raid some cities on the North Sea shore by the end of this turn. First, Knud and Abel's service marker is low on the calendar. Next turn, if Teuton player cannot pay, this lord will disband. And because no other lord is stacked with him, nobody will be able to pay for him, so it is wise to find money before leaving homeland. Knud and Abel start with the tax action. This action uses all their command card. Knud and Abel's lord spends his whole action in his seat stronghold, so he earns 1 coin and that's it. Okay, next card, Russian player Lord Domash. Without any Teuton force in Pskov, he can enter the city again and take back his property. But because Pskov is ravaged, he won't be able to forage here. Forage is never possible in a ravaged location. So Domash forages first where he is, in Dubrovno, then he marches to Pskov and feeds his troops with 1 provender. Next card, Teuton player, Knud and Abel, and now the Danish brothers feel ready to board their ships and invade the Russian coast. This is the sail action. First rule, you cannot sail on ice. So, this action is only possible in summer or Rasputitsa, never in winter. Remember the calendar, that means that half of the game, sailing is not allowed. Sailing is a movement by sea from port to port. A port is shown by an anchor symbol. You cannot sail along a river, that is a white-colored way, only by sea from port to port. The sail action uses all command points from your command card. It cannot be combined with another movement or supply or foraging, for example. You cannot sail to a location occupied by an enemy lord, but you can sail to an enemy stronghold if it is empty, and you can even start a siege by doing so. In order to sail, you need ships. You need 1 ship for any provender you carry, and 2 ships per loot. You can carry as many foot troops as you wish, because foot troops can go down to the bottom of the hold, but it's not so easy with the horses. You need 1 ship to transport 1 horse unit if it is Teutonic. And because Russians are not used to sea travel, you need 2 ships for 1 Russian cavalry unit. Here, Knud and Abel with 5 ships can carry by far 2 horse units and 1 provender. All other assets are free. So, all is fine, anchor up. After a nice cruise, Knud and Abel land in Luga. Luga is not a city nor a fort, it's a trade route as shown by this symbol that looks like a Viking drakkar. A trade route is a trading port, a city dedicated to loading and unloading of ships. A player conquers it as soon as he enters its location, and because the trade route's name is written inside a simple box, the Teuton player immediately earns 1 victory point. And that's it. The sail action is a movement, so Knud and Abel get a moved fort marker and must feed their troops. They spend 1 provender. Next card, Russian player Lord Vladislav. And Vladislav has a big problem. According to the calendar, he will disband next turn. So, the only way for him to avoid that is to move quickly to Novgorod, because remember, at the beginning of the turn, Vladislav wisely mustered a special capability, Archbishopric of Novgorod, that makes from Novgorod a seat for all Russian lords. Thanks to this capability, Vladislav can now tax in Novgorod and gain a coin to stay 1 more turn in the war. So that's what he does. He marches twice, then forages in Novgorod to earn a provender he spends immediately to feed his troops. Next card, last Teuton card, Knud and Abel. Now that they have a bridgehead in Russian territory, they want to push as fast as possible and take the empty fort of Kaibolovo. Having 2 command points, they can gather provender before marching. They could forage to get 1 provender, but there is a better solution. Every time a lord chooses the supply action, he can trace a supply route back to his seat strongholds as we already saw. But he can also, in addition, get some supply by sea. With the supply action, a lord can gain 1 provender for each ship he owns, up to a maximum of 2 provender. if he is able to trace a route to a seaport, if he is a Teuton lord, or to Novgorod if he is a Russian lord. Like in a regular supply, this lord must own one suitable transport for each way he uses to the port or to Novgorod. This kind of supply is not possible in winter due to the freezing of the sea. So, how Knud and Abel can get their supply? By land, they would need one boat and 3 carts to trace a route to their seat of Wesenberg. And in fact, that would be impossible because a supply route cannot go through an enemy stronghold. It can go through an unfriendly location, but not an unfriendly stronghold. So let's see if Knud and Abel can get supply by sea. First, they are themselves in a seaport, so they don't even have to trace a route to that port. They just gain 1 provender per ship up to a maximum of 2. They have 5 ships, so they gain 2 provenders, the maximum. If they were already in Kaibolovo, they would get also their 2 provenders because they could trace a route to Luga through 1 waterway with 1 boat. Note that a lord can get supply both by land and by sea, to a maximum of 4 provenders, if he can link by land 2 seats and link to a port or Novgorod with 2 ships. Okay, back to our actual game. Knud and Abel just made a supplied action to get 2 provenders by sea. Now they have still 1 command point to spend. They march to Kaibolovo, immediately setting a siege. They will begin the next turn in an unfriendly location, so they will be unable to spend any lordship point during the levy phase. But had they stayed in Luga, they would have had the same problem, because in the levy phase you can muster only on your side of the border or in a conquered stronghold. Luga is a trade route and not a stronghold. Last card for this turn, Russian player Lord Vladislav. Being in Novgorod, he can do a tax action and earn the coin he will need to stay in the war. And that's the end of turn 2 campaign phase. Finally, we go through the Wastage phase. During this phase, lord by lord, each player checks if they have more than 1 asset in any one category or more than 1 Art of War card. If this is the case, this lord must discard 1 asset or 1 Art of War card. Knud and Abel must lose 1 asset, they discard 1 ship. Tomasz also, 1 asset, he discards 1 provender. Vladislav don't have to discard anything, but let's take another example here. If Lord Vladislav had 2 capability cards, he would have to discard something, 1 asset or 1 card. Okay. And now we check if there is a change of season. And yes, when you go from turn 2 to turn 3, you go from summer in light brown to winter in blue. From there, in winter, boats and carts will become useless and lords will need sleds to transport their provender. During Wastage phase, just when you go from summer to winter, all carts are changed into sleds. 1 cart giving half a sled rounded up. Later, when we go from winter to Rasputitsa, that's the opposite. All sleds are changed into carts, 1 sled giving half a cart rounded up. Note that there is no such change for boats nor ships. Boats and ships are useless in winter, lords just skip them until Rasputitsa and summer. For now, from turn 2 to 3, winter is beginning. Knud and Abel change their cart into 1 sled. The same for Russian Vladislav, and Tomasz changes 2 carts for 1 sled. And finally, both players can discard any of their Art of War cards. They can be capabilities that Lord mustered during a levy phase, or held event cards that they drew during event phase. Any lord cannot have more than 2 personal capabilities, and the number of general capabilities must stay lower than or equal to the number of that player's lords. There is no limit to the number of held events a player can have in his hand. Okay, and now, after this 2-turn playthrough, you know all the rules of Nevsky. All but 2 little rules that gives this game the last shine of chrome it deserves. At the end of the levy phase, each player can do a call to arms action. For the Teuton player, that means using the influence of William of Modena, legate of the Pope. And for the Russian player, that means using the financial power of the Veche of Novgorod. William of Modena is an Art of War card that any Teuton lord can muster as a capability. You remember, for 1 command point, any Teuton lord can take this card from the deck. As soon as it is mustered, the card is laid beside the map with the William of Modena's purple pawn on it. Then, during the call to arms step, that is just after the muster step, Teuton player can put this pawn on any friendly bishopric on the map. A bishopric is a double-boxed Teuton stronghold with a Catholic cross on the roof. There are 3 of them, Reval, Leal and Riga. These are the furthest city from Russian border. So this purple pawn can move from its capability card to a bishopric on the map. Let's say here that William of Modena goes to Leal. And during the same call to arms step, he can move to a friendly location or do one of 3 special actions A, B or C. To move to any friendly location, William of Modena doesn't have to follow trackways or waterways, he just flies to wherever he wishes. Remember that on the other side of the border, only conquer strongholds are friendly locations. He can also just go back to his capability card. Or he can do one of his 3 actions, A, B or C, his special abilities, and that's why Teuton player needs him. A. If he is located at a lord's seat and if this lord's cylinder is available on the calendar, he can freely muster this lord. Freely means that it doesn't cost any lord's command point and it doesn't require any die roll. Remember, when mustering a new lord, usually a die roll must be passed lower than or equal to this lord's fealty rating. William of Modena can muster the same lord without this die roll. It's very convenient for lords with a low fealty rating. B. If William of Modena is located at a lord's seat and this lord is not available on the calendar, for example here, let's suppose the purple pawn is in Odempe, that is Lord Yaroslav's seat. Lord Yaroslav is not available yet because his cylinder is in box 4 on the calendar. So, William of Modena with his call to arms B action can shift Yaroslav's cylinder 1 box left on the calendar. That will make him available 1 turn sooner. And C, third option, if William of Modena is at the same location as a Teuton lord, for example here Lord Herman, that lord can immediately spend again his all lordship capacity to muster as if playing a new levy phase again. And that's it. Beware, every time William of Modena uses one of his 3 powers, A, B or C, his pawn goes back to his card. Thus, as the Teuton player and in order to use William of Modena to the full extent of his abilities, you need to understand his dynamics. Let's take an example. Let's suppose I want to use William of Modena to freely muster Heinrich in Leal, power A, then to help Hermann to muster twice during his levy phase, power C. First turn, levy phase, 1 Teuton lord, whoever spend 1 command point to muster the William of Modena Art of War capability. He immediately gets the purple pawn. Then, during the same turn, end of levy phase, Teuton player puts that pawn in any bishopric on the map. Let's say Leal, of course, where he can immediately use his power A to muster Heinrich free of any command points and without any die roll. After that, like after any use of a special power, William's pawn leaves the map and goes back to its card. All that happened in only 1 turn. Next turn, Teuton player doesn't need to muster William of Modena's card again. He mustered it last turn. He can keep it until the end of the game if needed. During the call to arms step of the levy phase, he puts William on the map at a bishopric, but he cannot go directly to Odempe with Lord Herman because Odempe is not a bishopric. William goes to Riga. Then he immediately moves to Odempe to meet Herman. But, and that's the problem with William of Modena, because it's a or, he cannot immediately use his power C to help Herman playing a second levy phase. He must wait until next turn when he will use his power C and go back to his card. Note that while he is on the map, if a lord stacked with William leaves the location with a march, he can bring William with him. Okay, that was William of Modena, the legate of the Pope, leader of the Northern Crusade, purely Teutonic. But what about the Russian player? Of course, Russian player doesn't have any legate of the Pope, but he has the Veche of Novgorod, which is the ruling assembly of Novgorod bourgeoisie. The Veche of Novgorod can be found here in the bottom right corner of the map. It's a box, and at the beginning of the Great Campaign scenario called Crusade on Novgorod, there are here already one Russian victory point marker. This victory point marker represents the power of Novgorod ruling merchants. And this is an actual victory point marker. If the Russian player keeps it here without using it, it will count as a victory point at the end of the game. But during any call to arms step, Russian player can spend this power to get special abilities, A, B or C. These abilities are very close to William of Modena's for Teuton player. A. For one Veche victory point, he can freely muster any available Russian lord, free of any command point and without any die roll. And this new lord enters the battlefield at his own seat. Here, for example, this is turn 4 and Gavrilo's cylinder is available on the calendar. Russian player spends his one victory point in the Veche of Novgorod and muster Gavrilo at his seat, Pskov, as far as Pskov is Russian controlled. Note that Alexander, the best Russian leader and also the best lord in the game, has no fealty rating. That means that he cannot be mustered by another lord during the levy step. The only way to muster Alexander and bring him to the battlefield is with this Veche's Novgorod special ability, spending one Veche victory point. Andrei, Alexander's brother, has a fealty rating, but he can be mustered only by Alexander, his brother, or by this special ability of the Veche of Novgorod. B. For one Veche victory point, the Russian player can shift any cylinder on the calendar one box to the left. Easy, no prerequisite, spend one Veche victory point and shift the cylinder. That makes this lord available one turn sooner. And C, for one Veche victory point, any one lord at a friendly location can muster again using all his lordship rating. Here, for example, Gavrilo in friendly controlled location could muster with all his lordship values spending one Veche victory point. Okay, here are 3 ways to spend Veche victory point to get special abilities. But how does Russian player gain these Veche victory points? For these special abilities, Russian player cannot use regular victory points, those earned by conquering Teuton strongholds. The only way to earn Veche victory points is to reject Alexander's and Andrei's military help. The Veche of Novgorod is an assembly of wealthy merchants. They already drove Alexander and Andrei away from their republic some years ago. So, rejecting their help is their main way to show their power. And that's what are Veche victory points. Victory points earned by proving Veche's political independence against Alexander and Andrei. When Alexander or Andrei or both are available on the calendar, that is, if their cylinders are on the current turn's box or to the left of this box, then during the call to arms step, instead of using one of its ability A, B or C, the Veche can push Alexander and Andrei's cylinders to the right to the box next to the current turn. By doing so, it earns 1 Veche victory point, and that's the only way to gain these victory points that you can spend later on special abilities. For example, this is turn 13, Levy phase, call to arms step. On the calendar, Alexander and Andrei are both available. So, Russian player can push them forward to next turn, turn 14, and gain 1 special Veche victory point. If only one Lord, Alexander or Andrei is available, Russian player does gain his Veche victory point by pushing forward only the one available brother to next turn box. Note that next turn, turn 14, Alexander and Andrei become available again, and Russian player can push them forward again to earn a new victory point. That's a valid way for Russian player to gain victory points. He cannot gain more than 8 victory points in this way. And note also that because it is a OR, Russian player cannot gain and spend Veche victory points during the same call to arms step. Now you know all the rules and you are ready to play your own game of Nevsky. However, I chose to do a third video after this one, and for 2 reasons. First, as you know, each player has a deck of 18 Art of War cards, and from these decks of cards, 2 random events are drawn each turn, 2 per player, that is 4 events per turn. And after that, during Levy phase, from these same decks of cards, players can muster capabilities. These capabilities are especially important to build your strategy, so in the next video, we will together browse these 2 decks of cards and study what strategic options they give. Also, through the 2 first videos, you learn the game by actually playing 2 game turns. And perhaps, now, do you feel the need to take a step back and get a general, summarized and nicely geared set of rules? That's what you will get in the next and last video.